Bonjour, M. Carney. M. Carney, est-ce que c'est acceptable pour vous que les États-Unis demandent... Est-ce que c'est acceptable pour vous... Bonjour, bonjour, bonjour. Bonjour.
De la Terre.
Bonjour de la Terre.
Bonjour de la Terre. Bonjour de la Terre.
Est-ce que c'est acceptable pour vous? Est-ce que c'est
acceptable? J'étais là hier, monsieur. Alors, madame, elle parle.
Merci. Est-ce que c'est acceptable pour vous que les États-Unis demandent de nouvelles concessions au Canada avant même de négocier?
C'est une négociation. On demande des concessions, mais on ne rentre pas des concessions avant des... ou pas avec d'autres échanges. C'est une échange. C'est une échange, c'est juste un instant. Pardonnez-moi. Oui, dans un instant, oui.
Je veux juste clarifier. Donc, les États-Unis vous demandent de nouvelles concessions
Tout le temps, c'est toujours le cas dans une négociation. Déjà, demande des concessions, mais
avant même
il faut avoir une approche globale. Et nous avons une approche globale. On a du temps, on a du force, on a des options. On bâtit un Canada fort. Et on diversifie nos options.
Mais vous ne trouvez pas ça inacceptable que les États-Unis disent mettez quelque chose sur la table?
Non, c'est une négociation. Tout est acceptable dans une négociation.
Okay.
Everything in English. The question is, well, you can ask me the question in English if you
Should
wish.
Canada make any more concessions to get to the table with the U.S. And how do you balance them giving you a list? And if you finish that list,
there is a well. First thing, we have multiple levels of contact. We work through a series of issues. We understand what some of the what the Americans would call trade irritants or trade issues are. We have some on our side as well. We're well prepared around those issues. We will sit down and work through those issues with the broader approach in the negotiation. We've made some counter proposals, which they're aware, and the time will come to really roll up our sleeves. But ce n'est pas un cas d'avoir un demandeur, un autre supplicant. C'est pas le cas de tout. Like, it's not a case of the United States dictates the terms. We have the negotiation. We can come to a mutually successful outcome. It will take some time, and we will take some time.
But
why aren't you going to today? 1 out of 5, and you're way behind Harper and Trudeau's pace.
I am accessible to the media. I answer questions all the time.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome, and we'll continue to do so. We have a very strong team in this government, and I believe in the team, the ministers, Secretary of State, parliamentary secretaries, responding to Canadians. And that's important. That's important to how we govern. We govern as a team. We've got a lot on, important questions about the U.S., but at the same time, as I started, it's Earth Day, and one of the big things that the government is doing is the most ambitious, not strategy, but plan to put into place to achieve our goals with respect to protecting what really is, I would argue, the world's greatest natural heritage. I mean, we're the second largest country in the world. We have the longest coastline. We're going to protect 30% of our land, 30% of our waters by the end of this decade. We are doing that at the same time we're negotiating with the United States. We're doing that at the same time that we're building affordable housing in Canada. We're doing that at the same time as we're building nation-building projects. We're doing that at the same time that we are striking 20 trade and security agreements around the world. At the same time that we're reinforcing child care, pharmacare, dental care. We're doing all of that at the same time. I am not doing all of that at the same time. I'm doing that with a team of ministers, a team of officials who are working on that, and it's important, my judgment, it is important that they are available, that they also answer the questions. It would also be useful if the opposition had more than one question, which they repeat.
Your sister, you're showboating, and you're not explaining
Alors, je suis avec le secrétaire d'État de la Nature parce que c'est le jour de la Terre. Et le gouvernement du Canada a une stratégie, plus une stratégie, un plan que nous mettons en œuvre afin de protéger 30% de nos eaux et de nos terres. C'est de protéger la nature, bâtir bien le Canada et de valoriser la nature. Et je voudrais remercier Mme Provost et son équipe pour le travail. C'est tellement important. Nous avons un patrimoine, un héritage incroyable. Oui, M. McKinnon, c'est absolument correct. Alors, oui.
Les partis d'opposition ont l'impression que vous êtes en train...
Les partis d'opposition doit soutenir notre stratégie pour la nature. C'est une responsabilité de tous les députés du Parlement, parce que nous sommes ici pour un certain temps, pas trop de temps.
Pour trop longtemps, mais on va faire le travail.
Il faut faire le travail. Sorry, I forgot in English. Yeah, sorry. It's a great pleasure to be here with the Secretary of State for Nature on Earth Day. The Government of Canada has not just an ambitious strategy, but a clear plan that we're putting in place to protect 30% of our land, 30% of our oceans. We have the most incredible natural heritage. In response to a colleague's comment, we have a responsibility as deputies, all of us, whatever party we're in, to leave Canada in a better position than we found it. We're here for a short period of time. Our heritage is there for all time. We're the second largest country in the world. We have the longest coastline. We have incredible biodiversity, and we can do both. We can protect our nature, we can build our country strong, and we can build well for future generations.
Are you open to putting public money to build a pipeline from Alberta? Is that on the table?
We're going to build this country strong, and we're going to build it well.
Using public money for a pipeline? Est-ce que c'est acceptable pour vous que les États-Unis demandent encore une fois de nouvelles concessions au Canada, avant même que...
On ne négociera pas en public. Moi, ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que les gens ont vu, on est très ferme à la table des négociations pour défendre l'intérêt de l'industrie canadienne, des travailleurs, l'intérêt canadien. Bien, je l'ai réitéré la semaine passée. Vous avez vu avec le secrétaire au Trésor, on était ensemble à Washington et j'ai été très clair là-dessus. Je pense qu'ils comprennent que c'est dans l'avantage autant des États-Unis que du Canada d'avoir une entente. C'est un monde qui est complexe, c'est un monde qui est volatile. Et je pense que pour eux d'avoir un voisin comme nous, qui est très stable au niveau des exportations énergétiques, qui évidemment permet d'avoir cette proximité-là pour nos industries, cette fluidité-là, ça sert les deux pays.
Mais en tout respect, M. Champagne, c'est pas du tout les échos qu'on a, nous.
Oui, mais il faut pas regarder tout ce qui se dit.
Non, mais je veux dire, on parle à des gens, on parle à des gens qui nous disent que du côté américain, on aime beaucoup plus en ce moment, on apprécie beaucoup plus l'approche mexicaine, il semble être beaucoup plus coulant, et on se demande pourquoi est-ce que le Canada fait pas plus de concessions. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de cette position américaine?
Bien, moi, je vous dirais, écoutez, il y a ce qui se dit dans les médias, puis il y a ce qui se dit dans les réunions. Moi, je peux vous dire, j'ai une bonne relation. J'étais avec le secrétaire pendant 1 heure à Washington.
Il ne demande pas une nouvelle concession.
On parle de dire qu'il faut que ce soit un accord qui soit dans l'avantage des deux pays. Je pense qu'on comprend les positions respectives des États-Unis comme celle du Canada, mais je vous dirais que regardez un peu même ce qu'ils ont publié après notre rencontre. C'est très positif en disant on veut travailler avec le Canada. C'est le secrétaire au Trésor qui l'a émis.
C'est des irritants aussi, là?
Bien, il y a des irritants des deux côtés. C'est normal quand vous avez une relation aussi importante. Il faut se rappeler que, moi je leur dis souvent, j'espère que vous êtes contents de me voir, on est le plus grand client des États-Unis. On achète plus des Américains que la Chine, le Japon, l'Angleterre combinés. Donc, cette relation-là, c'est une relation bilatérale. Donc, c'est important, nous, de faire valoir les intérêts canadiens puis de continuer la discussion. Mais si vous regardez à date, la stratégie canadienne a payé des dividendes. On est le pays au monde qui a le meilleur accord avec les Américains présentement. Donc ça, c'est quand même...
l'ancien accord.
Oui, mais quand même, ça donne aujourd'hui pour nos exportateurs canadiens 85 % des produits sont couverts par l'exemption, puis le tarif effectif, c'est le plus bas.
In English, the U.S. wants more concessions from Canada. Have we already made too many? And are you open to making any more concessions to get to the table like Mexico has?
Well, it's not about concession, it's about making a deal, but the right deal for Canada. Well, there are things to be done on both sides. This needs to be a win-win situation. What I would say is that if you look at the position of Canada today in the world, coming back from Washington, 85% of our trade is subject to the exemption. We have the lowest effective tariff rate than any country about in the world. So I would say our strategy to engage, to defend Canadian industry, Canadian workers has been working because the numbers speak for themselves.
There's industries that are being very hard hit. One of the numbers is 50% tariffs.
I agree. Well, you're quite right in a sense, depending which industry, if you're in softwood lumber, if you're in the auto industry, in the steel, or aluminum industry, it's felt very differently. What I'm saying is that on the aggregate, Canada still as the best possible deal with the United States that you can have today.
Are you seeing any signs of progress during your talks in the U.S. about
I think the tone was positive. Just don't take it from me. Look at the readout that was issued by the Secretary of the Treasury. It was a very constructive, positive discussion. We spoke for almost an hour, I think. We understand that there's things on both sides. They understand that Canada is their largest customer, and 2/3 of their states have Canada as their first export market, so it's something...
Est-ce qu'on est pressé de signer?
On comprend que vous êtes pas très pressé.
Oui.
Bien, ce qu'on veut, c'est le bon accord. Je pense que là-dedans, ce qui compte, c'est le résultat. Si vous regardez les chiffres aujourd'hui, le Canada a le meilleur accord. Donc, nous, c'est sûr qu'on veut être constructif à la table des négociations, mais on veut un bon accord pour l'industrie canadienne.
Si les midterms américains...
The pension fund owners is setting a target for Canadian investment. They want to redirect.
Yeah.
Are you asking other big pension funds or other folks in the private sector to start redirecting their investment domestically?
Well, I think that the Canadian pension funds are seeing the attractiveness of Canada. I mean, if you look at foreign direct investment, we are at a record high, I think, in 20 years. I think the major project office, the fact that the world is very complex and volatile, Canada becomes a very attractive place for investment. It's just a reflection that we've seen from a number of international investors, but also Canadian investors. People realize that we have strong fundamentals, and actually when you have the International Monetary Fund that say Canada will have the second fastest growth in the G7, we have the strongest fiscal position of all G7 countries. Obviously, if you're an investor, you look where you put your money. You put your money in a place where you see growth, where you see stability, predictability, and Canada stand up.
Explicitly to do that?
Well,
meeting with them and saying,
listen,
it's time to bring your money
they're coming with us at a number of international meetings, but I think they see for themselves the attractiveness of Canada, and we're happy to work with them, obviously.
Est-ce que vous avez espoir? What are non-negotiables? What are some of the non-negotiables for CUSMA? Have you said that to the Americans?
Yeah, we're not going to negotiate in public, but they certainly understand our position. You know, there's a number, like your colleague was asking, of sectorial tariffs that we need to resolve with respect to steel, aluminum, the auto sector, softwood lumber. So they understand. Well, listen, we've been very clear where we stand, and we're going to continue to push for defending Canadian interests. And so far, honestly, it's been working.
Est-ce qu'on va avoir un accord d'ici les midterms? Est-ce qu'on va avoir un accord d'ici les midterms?
L'important, c'est d'avoir un bon accord. Je pense que c'est ça.
Donc,
si vous regardez les résultats aujourd'hui, le monde est conscient que le Canada a le tarif effectif le plus bas des autres pays. Donc, je pense que notre stratégie a été la bonne. Merci. Well, I think it's a long-standing tradition in parliamentary system that the committee needs to reflect what you see in the House, but we've been very clear. We're going to govern with humility and confidence. I've been reaching out even to opposition parties when it comes to the spring statement, you know, so we're working with everyone that wants to work with us to advance the interests of Canada.
On dit que le Canada doit faire de nouvelles concessions aux États-Unis. Ce qu'on entend, c'est que l'administration Trump aimerait bien que le Canada fasse de nouvelles concessions avant même de négocier.
Ça me surprend pas. Ça me surprend pas, non. Je me demande, mais ça ne veut pas dire qu'on va accéder, mais c'est des discussions qui doivent se dérouler autour de la table de négociation, pas en public.
Pourquoi ça ne vous surprend pas qu'ils demandent ça, les Américains?
C'est pas la première fois qu'ils font ça. Ils ont toujours des irritants, puis c'est leur façon de négocier. On a vu une façon qui est hautement asymétrique, mais encore une fois, c'est quelque chose qui se fait face à face.
In English, what do you think of the U.S. asking for more concessions from Canada to get at the table? And has Canada already made too many concessions?
Well, it's not a surprise. It's not something that they haven't done before, and if we've seen anything from this administration is a highly asymmetrical way of negotiating, and this is just another expression of it. But again, this is something that's going to stay around the negotiation table face to face.
Canada settled a lawsuit with Roblox. I'm wondering if the online harms legislation contemplates video games where harmful activity is happening at all.
Well, I think anyone that is hosting a platform that has that potential needs to look at who its audience is and the harms that are occurring. The gaming industry is different than other platforms, and the more that they become sort of social media-ish, the more they expose themselves to responsibility and potentially regulation. But I think gaming is a bit of a different animal, to be frank.
Qu'est-ce que le Canada a gagné en faisant déjà des concessions aux Américains? Parce que l'été dernier, par exemple, sur le numérique, on a fait des concessions, on a reculé. Est-ce qu'il y a eu des gains d'après ça?
Je pense que je l'appuie que le Premier ministre voulait se démontrer raisonnable. Et puis, je vais pas m'avancer sur les répercussions que ça a pu avoir en privé ou autour de la table de négociation.
Est-ce qu'il y a eu des concessions au niveau de la culture?
The U.S. wants Canada to put American alcohol back on the shelves as one of these concessions. What do you think of that idea? Is that something that Canada should ask the premiers to do?
Really something that'll have to be decided by premiers, but again, these are all elements of a larger discussion around our economic relationship with the U.S.
Est-ce que ça serait une bonne idée, d'après vous, de faire de nouvelles concessions aux Américains là, pour leur faire plaisir? Parce qu'il semble qu'ils veulent d'autres concessions du Canada.
Vous savez que nous avons un ministre sur le dossier là.
Oui, mais vous êtes aux affaires étrangères.
Oui, bien sûr, je vais répondre maintenant. Mais bien sûr, les négociations continuent et ça va être une pièce de notre conversation avec les États-Unis. Ce n'est pas un moment pour arrêter les négociations. On va continuer, on va être à table avec les Américains et ça, c'est le travail.
Est-ce que vous trouvez ça raisonnable? Est-ce que vous trouvez ça...
Can you repeat in English? And are you seeing any signs of progress? Because Canadians are wondering that right now, because this is all going on behind closed doors.
There is continued conversation, as Minister LeBlanc has said, in and outside the chamber. And in addition, we have a number of other trade negotiations continuing, and that's the work of Minister Sidhu and myself all over the world, diversifying our trade relationships so that we double non-U.S. trade over the next 10 years.
Is the White House not willing to negotiate without more concessions, and what specific concessions are they looking for before going back to the table?
This is the conversation that is ongoing between the minister responsible and the negotiating team, as well as Janice Charette and Ambassador Wiseman. That's the conversation that's happening in terms of putting forward what's in Canada's best interests and ensuring that we remain at the table to reach the steps which will lead to the ultimate review. Il y a des progrès, toujours, quand on va continuer. Est-ce que je pourrais finir, mes amis? Est-ce que je pourrais finir?
OK. Je pose la question. Est-ce qu'il y a du progrès?
Toujours, quand on est à table avec l'autre côté, ce cas c'est les Américains, il y a de progrès parce qu'on doit négocier et on va continuer d'avoir les conversations nécessaires pour accomplir les objectifs. Donc, c'est le progrès et de rester à la table, et ça, c'est le cas maintenant. Okay? In English, and then I have to go.
The question was, is there progress?
I understand. Yeah. So, in the context of diplomacy, being at the table to continue negotiations is of the utmost importance. And as Minister LeBlanc has said in and outside the chamber, he and the negotiating team, consisting of Ambassador Wiseman and the chief negotiator, Janice Charette, continue to be engaged, continue to be at the table, making progress on behalf of our country, advancing our country's interests, and that, in this moment, is significant and will continue to occur until we reach a place where Canada's interests are well protected and represented in the formal outcome. Thank you.
Négocier avec les États-Unis qui nous demandent un prix d'entrée. Le prix d'entrée pourrait-il avoir un effet sur le milieu agricole québécois?
Nous, ça a toujours été clair, quand on parle par exemple de la gestion de l'offre, c'est non négociable. Donc, on part de cette prémisse-là.
Mais il y a moyen de faire des ajustements, là?
Je ne vais pas commencer à spéculer sur l'état des discussions avec les Américains. Je laisserai le soin à mon collègue Dominique Leblanc de peut-être vous donner plus de détails. Merci.
What do we want?
Donald Trump wants more concessions from Canada to get to the table, including putting American alcohol back on the shelves in Canada. What's your message to him?
I think we'd consider anything that gets us a deal. We'd have to see. I mean, it's transactional. What do we get? What are we giving up? So.
Has Canada already given up too much?
I don't know. You have to get into the specifics.
Well, what do you think? You're part of caucus?
What's that?
You're part of caucus. What do you think Canada should do to try to get to the table?
Act in the best interests of Canadians, not in the best interests of Americans. So it might mean giving and taking, but I don't know the particulars, and it would depend on the particulars.
But do you think it's time, because we know alcohol is a big irritant for the Americans, do you think Canadians should consider putting it back on the shelves to try to...
No, buy Canadian alcohol, drink Canadian whiskey, no bourbon until things change.
How are things going to change in committees from now on with the majority?
I think it's going to be easier for a committee because previously committee, and especially going line by line, the Conservatives could overturn the chair, for example. It was very frustrating dealing with committees. So now with the majority, it certainly makes things easier.
Are you personally happy about this moving forward?
Yeah, I love to be on a lot of committees. I love to spend my whole day on committees.
Making more concessions to try to get to the table with the U.S.
You know, it's a strong relationship that's supported both countries, and I think that we have certainly shown a willingness to come to the table to work on certain trade irritants in the past. We've talked about them over the past year, and so, you know, I hope we just get to the table. That's
Has Canada already made too many concessions?
No, not at all.
We should make more concessions? That's what you're saying?
I didn't say that either. I think the nature of a trade relationship is it's a discussion, you know, and a discussion is an important thing to have with an important trade partner like the U.S. Doesn't mean that there's any linear path here. It means we've got to keep talking.
What do you think of the fact, though, that the U.S. are suggesting to Canada, put something more on the table, make more concessions before we have those talks?
Well, I've read about it in the paper, but I haven't heard that directly from the Americans. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that part has to
There's pros and cons to all of the various routes under consideration. Obviously, a greenfield route to a different port adds a certain amount of redundancy. It would also cut a day off of travel to Asia, but there's no question it would be more economic and probably face less local opposition if you had a southern route, and there's some real strength in bringing people together on something like that. Look forward to seeing what Alberta brings forward.
Does the Carney government prefer a route? Does the Carney government prefer a route? Do you have any sense?
No. We want to see what Alberta brings forward. They're having discussions, and all of these discussions are going to be matrix-style discussions, pros and cons of different options, and you got to weigh those, and you got to look at what those benefits are.
What are the discussions on the federal level, though, about the route? Is that actually being discussed?
Look, we've always said we'll react to a proposal from Alberta when Alberta brings one forward. They've said that they're going to bring one forward by the end of June, and so at that point, I think we'll have something to bring.
What's your understanding of the sticking point with getting an industrial carbon pricing increase? What's the issue? Why is it taking as long?
No, well, we already agreed on a price back in November. What we're having right now are technical conversations about the ways these things are implemented. We all know that there are many different ways you can apply a price to carbon. Quebec's got a different price than Ontario, than Alberta, than BC. Different models.
But it seems that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is saying that the U.S. doesn't have it, we have to get a price that's right. She seems to be veering more towards we're not going to see increases to that.
Well, look, I'm not going to prejudge or talk about conversations that are occurring at different tables, but the MOU was pretty clear. Everybody knows what they signed. There are a lot of technical details underneath that people need to work through, and we've got top officials both in the Alberta government and the government of Canada working through them as we speak.
Should the federal government consider putting a public meeting in public pipeline?
Look, I think that we were pretty clear in the MOU. This is going to require a private proponent. And look, if the government of Alberta has an interest in it and wants to use public funds on that, I guess that's their right.
Is the government open to it though? Like you can still. I mean, even if there is a private proponent, would the government be open to putting any federal dollars towards getting a pipeline built?
Look, I haven't heard any conversations like that. I think the reality is immediately as soon as you build something, the minute you put your shoulder behind something as a government, people are going to say, what is that? Is that an example of a government providing an advantage? And look, I look forward to those conversations.
Are you open to that? Are you open to federal money going towards, if that's what it needs?
Am I personally open to that? Look, personally I'd be okay with us finding ways that we can assist a pipeline. I wouldn't want to put personally, I don't want to buy TMX. I don't think that's necessarily what we're talking about here. But the reality is, there are a lot of society benefits, economic benefits of creating a pipeline to the West Coast, and the market doesn't necessarily reflect all of those benefits. We live in a north-south continent. It is always going to make more economic sense for an oil company to go north-south to get access to that big U.S. market. But as Canadians, we have an interest in economic security. We have an interest in optionality and diversifying markets. And I think the Canadian government's got to be alive to those interests.
It sounds like you would be okay if the federal government did put some public money behind getting this project built in some way.
Well, look, I personally am just fine with it as long as it makes sure that we are more economically independent from the United States and it provides us that optionality. But that's not a discussion that I've had more broadly in the government, and I think that we've got to be realistic. There are many, many ways that we can have this conversation and many ways it can unfold. We don't even have a pipeline project yet. That's something that the government of Alberta's got to bring forward.
The northern route that Alberta seems to be interested in seems to be much more technically difficult, with less consultation. I mean, would you encourage the Alberta government to think more along that TMX route?
I mean, look, the Alberta government, I used to work for the Alberta government. It's a very sophisticated operation, particularly on matters like this. They certainly know what the pros and cons of various routes are. I'm sure that's something they're weighing as they start thinking about their proposal. But it's their proposal. They're going to have to bring it forward, and it's going to depend on the things that they most value and the things that they most want, and the things that their private partners are going to most want.
Do you think a private proponent will come forward, given circumstances?
Absolutely, I believe a private proponent will come forward. This has never been a better time to invest in Canadian energy. It's never been a better time to invest in Canada. We have the highest foreign direct investment per capita in the G7, and it's the highest in 18 years. People are pretty excited about what we're doing here.
You said there's a lot of government rules that are in the way, like the tanker ban, like some legislation like C-69. Do those need to go for a company like Enbridge to put money forward?
Well, the MOU says if there is an agreement and we can get everyone on board and we can go to a northern route, that the tanker ban would be exempted in that particular instance. So, I think that there's a lot of straw dogs out there. I think we have to appreciate negotiations are ongoing. In negotiations, people will state positions, and they will state, their view of the world in stronger terms, perhaps, than reality. But things are very positive. Things are moving forward, and there's a lot of positive conversations about energy development in this country. Thank you.
Par exemple, les derniers avec le numérique?
Je vous dirais que, comme vous le savez, comme vous l'avez entendu, le gouvernement canadien s'entoure de gens très solides qui reconnaissent que nous avons effectivement fait des aménagements au cours des derniers mois pour maintenir et solidifier la relation avec les États-Unis. Ceci étant dit, on fait aussi beaucoup pour diversifier nos options. Dans une conversation avec les Américains, c'est important de montrer que nous sommes capables aussi de travailler avec d'autres pays. C'est partie
Parce que eux, ça les hérite, ça.
Peut-être, mais c'est sûr que pour les Canadiens, ça nous fait plaisir de voir que d'autres pays, dans un contexte d'instabilité et de manque de fiabilité de nos voisins du Sud, que le Canada est capable de travailler avec d'autres pays. Donc, peu importe que ça hérite nos amis américains, ça fait plaisir à beaucoup d'autres pays aussi.
Is there anything else that Canada should be putting on the table to try that you'd be comfortable with to try and get the Americans there?
I think it's a great question. The answer will probably going to come at some point. For now, I think we're focusing on what we can do at home, what we should be doing also outside of Canada, and obviously in outside of the U.S. because our relationship with the U.S. has been.
Canadians do want to know what's going on with these talks. There's tariffs hitting sectors hard. They want to know what's happening. So what can you share about?
Prime Minister Carney was quite clear when he posted this video just a few days ago. I think he wants to show transparency, but he also wants to show leadership, and we'll just continue doing that.
C'est quoi votre, Monsieur Duclos, c'est quoi votre plus grande inquiétude comme concession? Qu'est-ce que les États-Unis demandent qui pourrait faire le plus mal au Canada et au Québec dans le contexte actuel, à ce stade-ci, en tout cas, des négociations?
Je vous dirais que ce que demandent les États-Unis, on a déjà indiqué dans un certain sens, et dans beaucoup de sens, que nous allons nous tenir debout pour ne pas le concéder sur la culture, sur la langue, sur la gestion de l'offre. M. Carney a été clair durant la campagne et depuis. Donc là-dessus, on peut être rassuré. Maintenant, il y a d'autres conversations qui doivent avoir lieu, j'imagine, et c'est M. Leblanc là, qui en est le plus au courant. Merci.
Tell us, how will that make a difference the way that SECU runs and the way that you plan to run SECU?
Well, there's something that will not change, I think. It's the fact that we will work collaboratively. I have a great public safety committee. We work really well together. I salute the partnership of the Conservatives and the Bloc until now. What might change is that I think our members, our MPs, will become less nervous. Nervous in the sense that in the context of a minority government, MPs fear that the day and the week to come will lead them into an election. That creates attitudes and encourages behavior that may not be the best one to deal with the issues that matter to Canadians. So I think the nervousness of MPs in my committee will change with a different composition, but the need to work collaboratively, that will not change.
What about selection of witnesses, for example? Does the majority get to sort of have the hammer on selection
No,
of
it will remain collaborative. Again, the Conservative and the Bloc have been very good until now to propose witnesses, to support their appearances, and I'm convinced and confident that it will remain the same.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is nothing new. This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. When the composition of Parliament changes, it's completely consistent with our parliamentary traditions that the composition of committees change as well.
But your party has around 51% of the seats in the House, but some committees will have 58% of the seats after the motion is approved. So isn't that an imbalance?
No, it's a reflection of what the composition of Parliament is. That weight is simply because you're doing averages, but there should be a reflection in committee of what's reflected in Parliament. Thank you.
He shows up once a week, and yesterday he sat there, and he doesn't answer anything except for leaders' questions. Why shouldn't he answer maybe an MP's question?
How many times yesterday did Pierre ask the same question?
Okay, I'll grant you that, but
how many times did the Prime Minister answer that question?
Okay, but nonetheless, he's still not there enough, and that could be the Bloc wants to ask a question.
Yeah.
He's never answered a question from a New Democrat. Period.
Yeah. Well, I mean that in part has to do with the composition of Parliament.
There's no rule that says you can only talk to leaders. You should
no, but I haven't
answered questions.
Yeah, I haven't seen the NDP ask a question off the top where he's been there. So if that's happened, maybe I haven't been in the House. But I think, David, I get where you're coming from. I think we're living in pretty extraordinary times. I think that there is a belief that question period, certainly the opposition would have you believe this is the only venue whereby there's an opportunity for the Prime Minister and the government to be held accountable. Of course, that's not the case. He is busy signing trade deals, negotiating with world leaders, dealing with significant crises that are happening around the world. He is in question period. He is answering questions. I would maybe suggest that if the Leader of the Opposition took question period a little bit more seriously, as opposed to just being a factory for clips where he's asking the same 10 questions over and over again, that perhaps it might elicit something different out of the Prime Minister.
Can I ask you about your industry committee?
Yeah,
started that emergency study
we did.
on that. Presumably that means your committee would like to turn something around and report to the government very quickly. I thought some of the testimony was really compelling from some of those mold makers.
Very, very challenging time for a lot of people in that industry right now, particularly in southern Ontario. The 232 tariffs, which changed recently to incorporate a broader scope of their finished products, is having detrimental impacts. The job of a parliamentary committee, of course, is to hear from witnesses and experts in a given field to understand more comprehensively the depth of an issue. That's what we're doing right now, and we will absolutely report that back to the House and speak with the relevant ministers in order to ensure that they have a deep understanding, both through us as members representing grassroots Canadians, but also by virtue of the testimony you receive from people to understand what we need to do next.
Monsieur Claire, est-ce que c'est normal que les États-Unis exigent des concessions du Canada avant même que l'on s'assoie pour commencer à réviser la CUSMA?
Je sais pas. Je ne sais pas si c'est quelque chose qui est arrivé peut-être il y a quelques années. J'ai jamais vu quelque chose comme ça en avant. Alors, le Premier ministre, ministre Leblanc et des autres comprend plus que moi où nous sommes dans les négociations avec les Américaines maintenant. Alors, ça me semble peut-être un peu différent que des négociations avant, mais comme j'ai dit, je ne suis pas là à la table. C'est le ministre Leblanc et le premier ministre pour décider qu'est-ce qu'on va faire.
Mais est-ce que vous pensez que le Canada devrait peut-être faire un nouvel acte de bonne foi et accepter de nouvelles concessions pour plaire aux Américains, pour être dans les bonnes grâces des Américains?
Bien, ce sont des négociations extrêmement complexes, comme j'ai dit. J'ai pas une vue en tête de qu'est-ce qui est là sur la table. Alors, si c'était, hey, paye 100 000 $ et en échange, on va avoir des choses exceptionnelles pour le Canada, bien peut-être ça vaut la peine. Alors, dans l'absence de tous les détails, je ne peux pas vraiment offrir un commentaire pour ça.
Merci.
Merci.
Be prepared to make more concessions, new concessions to get the U.S. into
We should sign a deal that's good for Canada.
And in getting a deal that's good for Canada, should we be prepared to make more concessions?
Well, if concessions are concessions that are harmful for Canada, then we shouldn't sign the deal. If what we're referring to right now as concessions, as I mentioned to your colleague a moment ago, are part of a broader sweep of measures that actually on the net of things aren't in fact concessions and end up being net positives for Canada, then it's a different way of looking at it. If what you're asking is, should Canada accept a bad deal, the answer is no.
American alcohol off the shelves, should they, this is kind of what's been raised as like a make a peace offering so that we can get to the table.
Right. Well, I mean, a peace offering speaks to what a negotiation is, which is compromises. A negotiation is an ongoing iteration of processes whereby one side gives a little on something and takes a little on another. The details of those are very complex. Minister Leblanc and the Prime Minister are obviously, and Madame Charette are the lead for Canada in these negotiations. I don't know what the specific details are in relation to this back and forth negotiation that's taking place. So it's hard for me to say we should accept a compromise here in exchange for this, because the value of that has to be weighted against the comprehensive sum of the package itself.
Do you think you have enough information about what's going on in these negotiations at this point? Because you would have enough information from the government strategy?
Well, it's not an effective negotiation strategy to talk publicly about closed-door meetings that you're having with your counterparts across borders. So I think it's a little bit of a false narrative to suggest that because we don't know the exact details of what our ambassador or our lead trade negotiator or our minister and prime minister are talking about daily or weekly with the Americans is somehow a weakness. I think that's a very natural and normal part of what a trade negotiation process looks like. It doesn't worry me at all that I can't respond to you with more specific details about that.
Does it worry you that it's taking this long?
Well, I think every day that goes by that we don't have a good deal for Canada by virtue of the decisions that the U.S. administration has decided to take vis-a-vis tariffs is obviously having an impact negatively on our industry. This is why we are diversifying with 20 new trade deals in the last year, why the Prime Minister has actively been talking about the necessity for us to broaden our economic base. It's why we're having conversation through relief programs and other things with industry about how we can help mitigate this. Everybody wants a deal. This isn't a matter of somebody getting up in the morning and saying, we don't want Canada and the U.S. to reach a deal. The question is the deal going to be good for Canada? And if it's not going to be good for Canada, then we shouldn't sign the deal. And that's the hard work that the Prime Minister and the Minister are doing right now. Thanks, Vince.
Yeah. I'm wondering if AI psychosis is an issue on your radar, and if that's something that's going to be addressed in any of your government legislation.
Look, we're at the forefront of some interesting issues where I'm starting to learn more every day, including on the subject that you mentioned, but by no means have I developed the expertise necessary to fully explain the legislative approach. Of course, it's not just me who's going to be involved with that particular piece of legislation. Ministers Miller, Mr. Solomon, Minister Ananda Sangri are all engaged on the issue along with myself. We'll have more more to say when we're a little further along in the legislative development process. But we're going to be considering all of the issues that we've learned about through media reports.
Do you think it's something that can be handled by the online harms bill, or is it like too complex and different?
Look, at this stage, this is an issue I've only very, very recently become aware of. As you can appreciate, as the technology emerges, we're very quickly learning about new phenomenon, new ways that it's impacting people, particularly concerned with how some of these emerging issues are impacting young Canadians. We'll be considering everything that we do learn about as development of this legislation advances. But I do expect thematically over the next number of years, we're going to continue to learn more as AI is rolled into different applications. And this is going to be an ongoing process that I expect will continue to develop over the next number of years.
I just like to go back to non-standing and also asking you this.
I
just want to understand the timeline you're setting for yourself. Because there's a case at the Supreme Court, so you're talking about the bill in the Senate. Do you have a timeline in mind?
Well, so I don't have a date to broadcast, and I don't want to broadcast with certainty because there's things that are not within the control of my office or the Government of Canada. Of course, when you're anticipating the timeline of a Supreme Court decision, that's an issue for the court. They should take their time to make the decision the appropriate way in accordance with their ability to manage their own schedule. Similarly, the timing of a Senate bill arriving before the House is dependent upon factors that are outside of our control. So we're dealing, in all likelihood, with this issue because the Senate has started the conversation. When the Senate advances the bill to the House, if the Senate advances the bill to the House, we'll of course be looking to deal with it at that time.
Would you see it as necessary to wait to deal with this S18 until the Supreme Court has made its decision?
I think that would be preferential. Of course, again, the timing not entirely being within the control of the government on either of those two variables, it's filled with uncertainty. The reason I believe that would be desirable is some of the issues that the bill seeks to tackle, again, only insofar as it impacts the federal government's use of the notwithstanding clause, may actually be disposed with by the court. There's the possibility that the court will consider how and to what extent the notwithstanding clause could be used. Of course, if there's a constitutional decision from the Supreme Court of Canada, that would obviate the need to legislate in the space. Okay, thank you. Well, it's a long-standing tradition that committees would reflect the majority or minority status of the House. I think everyone would reasonably expect that the changes that are implemented at committee would allow the government to move forward with legislation with the full benefits of the majority government we now hold.
Conservatives have argued that this goes against the convention and the spirit of such discussions because such agreements are last for the entirety of the parliament and not just one sitting.
Well, I don't think it counts as a convention if you cite a rule for the first time when it suits your partisan interests. That's not a convention I've ever been familiar with. The convention that I am aware of and have lived through for more than a decade now is that when there's a majority government in the House, there should be a majority on committees, and when a minority in the House, a minority on committees. That's been my experience for over a decade. Thank you.
Not in this Parliament? Not a committee chair, but
I thought you were. Well, let me. Just the getting majorities on committees, how do you think that might change the tenor of committees, witness selection, topic selection? I don't know. How do you think it's going to change?
Well, witness selection and topic selection is usually done on a consensual basis, and all parties invite their different folks. The best people to rely on, of course, is the Library of Parliament to suggest witnesses to different committees based on the issue that's being studied. I think the only thing changes that is just... sorry, go ahead, Ben. The only thing that changes is that there'll just be a majority of Liberals, which would normally happen if Liberals had won the election. I mean, if you think of, if we do a little thought experiment on this, imagine if we had won the election with a clear majority in 2025 during the general election, we would have been majority for committees. And imagine if people were dissatisfied in the caucus and they left the caucus and we became minority. Clearly, everybody would be calling for us to change the committee structure with reason. Anyway, see you later.
That's useful. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate it. As a committee chair, I wonder if you could tell us how you think your committee will change the tone, the tenor, once Liberals have a majority on your committee.
Let's see. I think it will be easier to get things done quicker. So I hope so.
Okay. Thank you.
The
Prime Minister's been very, very clear about what the criteria are. The Prime Minister has been abundantly clear about the fact that criteria include no public funding. And I think that's what we're going to, we have to continue to stick by what we've said, and we're going to.
But I mean, the Parliamentary Secretary for Energy today said he personally would be okay with it. There's a net benefit to getting a new pipeline built. There might be a difference between buying a pipeline versus providing some kind of support. So are you saying the federal government should provide no kind of support for infrastructure, any type of funding at all to get a project like this off the ground?
What I said is that the Prime Minister has made very, very clear what the criteria are. And as a member of his caucus, a member of his team, I'm fairly confident that that's what we're going to do. Thanks.
What do you make of a southern route instead of a northern BC route? What do you make of a southern route or a pipeline instead of going through northern BC?
I think as right now, there is no proponent, there is no proposal, there is nothing on the table in terms of a new pipeline. I think that's been very, very clear. I think you have heard loud and clear the concerns that folks have had about lifting tanker bans and all of these other things without the appropriate approvals, without consent of Indigenous communities, without working with the province of British Columbia. If you look at the southern route, there have been discussions around that perhaps are easier for folks to work around because you've met some of the criteria already in terms of managing the environmental concerns and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, I go back to there is no proponent, there is no proposal on the table. But to the best of my knowledge, have been no agreement struck with anyone. There's been no discussions with First Nations in British Columbia about a possible additional pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I mean, we're putting the cart before the horse. We have to make sure that we look at this as a sequential process. If there is a proponent, we have to look at the proposal. If there's a proposal, we have to make sure we go through the key processes that the Prime Minister's articulated and outlined in the MOU, as well as the things that he said in his conversations with coastal First Nations and others. And I think that's the best way for us to get things built, to make sure we're following process rather than getting stuck in theoretical quagmires. Thanks.
Thanks for stopping.
And there's cuts coming to the CBSA, people that are supporting border guards. Are you concerned about that?
Well, in fact, we have increased the level of agents. We said we would hire 1,000 agents at CBSA. So I would have to look at, I'm not disclaiming what you're saying, I just would have to look at the specific because we said we would add 1,000 officers at CBSA in our CMP because these officers are needed as we're building stronger communities.
But these are cuts to the policy people that are essentially supporting the border agents.
Listen, like I said, I would have to look at the details of what you're referring
about
to.
About the early retirement?
But the concept behind it is that we needed to have more officers in order to support, our trade agenda, but also our safety agenda. So I would have to look at the details specifically of what you're referring to, but like I can say, we have decided to add 1,000 officers to the CBS in our CMP.
And of course, the expenditure review included this early retirement incentive. There's been about 5,000 public servants so far that have expressed interest. Is that enough to trim the public service to meet your goal?
Well, our objective is to bring back the level of the public service in line with the Canadian population, and looking at the ratio you find in the G7 country. What we had seen is that before COVID, or during COVID, we had seen an increase, and we're just normalizing in a very, in a way that, we'll have a sustainable level of civil servant to serve Canadians across our nation.
And what is your response to critics? Public servants that are taking ERI. There's about a little under 5,000 at this point that have shown interest.
I think it's preliminary. I don't want to comment on it until we kind of get the final numbers. I know a number of people are making decisions, and we want to obviously don't yet. No, we don't have 100% clarity on that.
Interest in early retirement, and you have a lot of public service.
To allow folks so that the numbers have to be restructured get smaller. So, if it makes financial sense for public servants to take their retirement early, that's fabulous.
And do you have any comment on changing the committee makeups through changing the standing orders? What will that change for the government?
I mentioned this to Mr.
Je peux avoir vos réactions aux dernières déclarations de M. Paul Saint-Pierre-Plamondon qui dit que le gouvernement fédéral a un agenda pour instaurer une frérie ou
Malheureusement, je n'ai pas eu l'occasion de lire ces derniers commentaires.
Frérie, c'est-à-dire islamiser le Canada.
Sorry, I just want
C'est probablement une théorie du complot, là, mais j'aurais besoin de la lire plus attentivement.
Ici, comme tu vois, ça m'apparaît un peu cette affaire-là, effectivement. Ça dit ceci. Le frérisme, voilà, l'agenda du voleur en place fédérale. Le frérisme. Quoi le frérisme? C'est islamiser. Islamiser le Canada.
Non, je pense que la politique la plus facile, c'est celle de diviser. Et il faut absolument travailler ensemble avec le contexte mondial dans lequel on vit. Il faut qu'on soit unis, il faut qu'on travaille ensemble et éviter de se polariser, se diviser comme d'autres pays le font très bien.
Juste une dernière question. Pensez-vous que les Québécois, voyant le chaos ailleurs, vont opter pour la stabilité à Québec? L'inquiétude, la tranquillité.
Je pense qu'un élu fédéral peut avoir une opinion sur ça, mais évite de la partager par respect pour le fait que c'est une élection provinciale et qu'on a tous bien hâte de voir quoi se passer les prochains mois.
Quelle différence que vous voyez entre les mouvements artistes québécois?
Il y a des ressemblances, il y a aussi beaucoup de différences. Je pense que la ressemblance, c'est qu'en Alberta, comme beaucoup de Québec, les mouvements séparatistes ne reconnaissent pas suffisamment qu'en 2026, c'est sûr qu'on est encore plus unis qu'on était avant. Le restant de la planète se divise, se sépare en grands blocs, les gens voient les en termes de tension, en termes de guerre. Je pense qu'au Canada, on a une expérience heureusement historique différente. Les deux mouvements sont probablement des mouvements qui se ressemblent sur certains points et le point se ressemble, c'est des mouvements qui divisent. Non seulement qui veulent diviser le Canada, mais qui veulent surtout et malheureusement diviser les provinces en particulier. Au Québec, que je connais mieux, évidemment, le grand danger de l'agenda de la séparation, c'est de diviser l'idée québécoise. C'est pas de diviser les Canadiens. J'ai vu plus que ça représentait en 95, un peu moins en 80. Les familles sont divisées, les régions sont divisées, les groupes sont divisés. C'est très mauvais pour le Canada, mais c'est encore pire pour le Québec et pour le Québec. C'est ce qui me fait peur de
Never happened before. Non, je suis McKinnon. Je peux avoir
Oh! Belle avance! Comment ça va?
Ça va bien, toi,
C'est une bonne question, mais je n'ai pas assez réfléchi pour être...
Je me demande si le mouvement au Québec est plus organisé qu'en Alberta. Est-ce qu'on doit moins s'inquiéter du menacement en Alberta?
Et on a vu en Alberta ce qu'on n'a pas vu encore, parce qu'il n'y a pas eu de référendum sur la séparation, c'est ce qu'on a vu au Québec au cours des 2 derniers référendums. Ça a laissé des cicatrices importantes. Des cicatrices économiques, mais aussi des cicatrices sociales et politiques. Donc oui, en Alberta, on ne l'a pas encore vécu, mais on va découvrir qu'une campagne référendaire qui porte sur la séparation de l'Alberta, c'est une campagne qui va diviser les Albertains. Au Québec, on l'a vu, l'Alberta le connaîtrait, il le connaîtra peut-être au cours des prochaines années.
Avez-vous peur de l'ingérence de l'étranger dans ces campagnes-là?
Il faut toujours se méfier de l'ingérence étrangère sur tous les aspects de la politique canadienne, y compris ceux qui concernent le référendum potentiellement à venir à l'Alberta. Merci beaucoup.
Il dit que l'agenda du gouvernement fédéral, c'est le frérisme.
C'est quoi ça?
Islamiser. On veut islamiser le Canada. Oui, il dit ça.
C'est ridicule. Et pourtant, il est pour la laïcité. Oui. Ce qui devrait s'exprimer. Je comprends. Honnêtement, il faudrait aller au fond de sa pensée si on en a une. Mais ça me semble très bizarre.
Puis, à quelques mois des élections, est-ce qu'il est en train de jeter encore plus de...
Je sais pas. Je sais pas. Je sais qu'il y a eu par le passé une tentative de plusieurs politiciens de faire du capital sur le dos des immigrants, puis surtout des musulmans, puis c'est inacceptable, mais je ne vais pas lui imputer des idées, il faudrait lui emmener des clarifications.
Parfait, merci.
Imagine if the government had won an overwhelming majority on April 28, 2025, we would have been majority on all committees. And then, let's say through dissatisfaction with the leadership, members of parliament left the party and joined the opposition, and we became minority. Well, if that was the case, there would be an immediate demand for us to change the structure of committees, because no longer does the committees reflect what's happening in Parliament. So it's just what's happening on the other side of the foot.
But what about the representation difference? I mean, we're talking about 58% on committees versus only kind of 50-ish% in the House.
You know, it's over a one-person difference. So, I mean, things are different now. I mean, I don't think we'd want to remove members of the opposition from committees at this point. So, to making sure that there's a majority, you add.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, spoke to some people in the industry space, kind of concerned about how long it took for the ball to get rolling on these consultations. What's the message for them who are concerned that we got potential negotiations starting on a new rail deal coming soon, and then the ports later this fall? You know, what's their message to them that why it took so long to finally get to the point that we started consultations on this report?
Well, I think, first of all, I've spoken with Derek about some of the concerns that have been raised. I mean, Derek, as you know, from FETCO. What I would say is that two things are happening at once. Nothing has stopped the work of the Federal Mediation Service working with both the ports and the rails. In fact, they've been regularly meeting. I have met with, in particular, the ports on both the union side and the employer side, including a joint meeting together to talk about the urgency of getting an early agreement, not getting to that place where there is any kind of concern about work stoppage, and that work is continuing. But this is about trying to change the way that we do things so that we have an earlier approach that fosters better relationships amongst the stakeholders, the unions and the employer groups, so that we are not always in this position with particular sectors that find it hard to get to collective agreements on time, therefore really threatening not only their own member security, but certainly the economy of Canada.
What do you make of that argument that, you know, this government has talked so much about diversifying our trade partners, so much about trade that goes through Asia Pacific comes through the Port of Vancouver. It's a notoriously dysfunctional labor relationship there, and the fact that delaying these starts of negotiations, that it may conflict with the start of negotiations on a new deal.
Well, I think it's incorrect because, in fact, the negotiations are undergoing. And, in fact, Secretary of State Sarah Shelley and I have met twice with the employers and the unions in the same room, by the way, which is actually somewhat unusual for the Minister and the Secretary to meet with all of the parties in the room. Federal Mediation Services is working with those parties. But again, this is about trying to plan for the future as well as, you know, really dealing with the situations today in those particular sectors, but overall creating a better landscape for more fruitful conversations earlier. That
argument that like you guys are waiting is not true.
Well, it's not accurate. It's not accurate because, in fact, as I said, we've been personally meeting with the parties as well as the Federal Mediation Services doing that work right now. Thank you so much.